Hey, I'm Steph Armstrong. I'm a filmmaker, and I've made 2 films actually based in Mysticity. One just premiered on July 1st called The Survivors. Maybe you saw it. I live here in Cambridge, Ontario. It's about an hour southwest of Toronto. And I've been coming up to the Cree Nation for almost a decade, 10 years, with Pastor Paul, or Chano. I'm married to my best friend, Matt, who I met in church youth group when I was 14. And 4 years ago, Paul married us over in a park overlooking the Toronto skyline. We have 2 cats named Betty and Waffles, and I love teaching them to do tricks. But today I want to talk to you about your identity, whose you are and who you are. But I'll start with me. I've let a lot of things define who I am. My appearance, my grades, my relationships, my family, my feelings, my status on social media. But no matter how pretty someone thought I was, or how much money I had, or how much money I spent, how many straight A's I got in school, or how proud my parents were of me, if my friends thought I was the coolest, still deep down, I could feel that I wasn't enough, and that not good enoughness turned into a sense of shame. I wanted to be more and more, better and better, and I always fell short of being perfect. Have you ever been scrolling on Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, and all of a sudden you start to feel a sense of lacking? Like there's this hole in your life and you need to fill it right now. Like all of a sudden you need all new clothes, or the right pair of shoes, or your bedroom needs to look a certain way, or your body needs to look like this TikToker or that TikToker. Or maybe someone has confused you about who you really are. Maybe you see all the perfect couples or people traveling around the world to the coolest locations and you think, I need that in order to be happy and to feel like I'm worth something. Have you been there? Are you following me? My lacking, it hangs over me. I try to cover it up by sharing fancy photos online, sharing about my successes, being the me I think that they want me to be, that the world tells me I should be. But that lacking and the needing and the wanting seeps through and threatens to bust out and expose me, to ruin everything. It threatens to let others know that I'm actually broken and flawed and that I don't know what I'm doing. I don't want my cracks to show. I want to be seen as good, for people to envy me, for people to think she's doing her best despite her circumstances. I have an autoimmune disease called fibromyalgia, and it affects my mood and my energy levels, and most of the time I'm in a lot of pain, physical pain. I probably got it when I was about 11, and my family and I were driving to a friend's house for lunch, and our car was totaled by 2 young drag racers. I've fought and fought and fought to not let my illness define me, trying so hard, believing doctors when they told me I was crazy. But last year, I was diagnosed, and I received such a rush of relief, but also so much shame, as this identity that I really am sick washed over me. It threatened to defeat me. I thought, what's the point? I'm disabled. I'm weak. I'm sick of being tired. I'm nothing. There's this woman in the Bible that I relate to. We don't know her name, but we know she has been bleeding, like constantly bleeding for 12 years. Can you imagine having your period for 12 straight years? That's disgusting. Boys, it's hard for you to imagine this. So I'll tell you, my husband is also sick, and he has a rare form of Crohn's disease that creates these tiny holes in his guts that then create these tracts that have to find an exit out of his body. And by doing that, they form these horrible, painful, infected abscesses. And he's been bleeding nearly every single day for 5 years. So this story could be about any one of us. But back to the story. For 12 years, she had experienced this sense of deep isolation and shame due to her uncleanliness. Because back in biblical times, when women were having their period, they had to stay home. They were considered unclean up until 7 days after their period ended. and no one wanted to touch them because they were unclean. And so we know she has been bleeding for 12 years, which means probably half of her life, because in biblical times, girls were considered women at around 12 years old and could then be married once they had, reached puberty. And if you also think life expectancy was only 40, that had been a lot of her life. So she had probably never married due to her condition, or her husband had divorced her because she couldn't produce a child, because she was always bleeding. Her condition defined her. Everyone knew she was the sick, unclean woman. Her family was probably very ashamed of her because she could never marry or have children. And that was very important in biblical times. Also, she'd spent all of her money trying to find a cure, but no doctor could heal her. How do you think she felt? Probably worthless, shameful, like she was nothing. But one day, she heard a man named Jesus was traveling through her town. She had heard he was the Son of God and that he could heal people. The woman decided she'd risk offending the members of her community by her uncleanliness, and so she left home and went in search of Jesus. She had nothing to lose. Jesus was surrounded by huge crowds of people, and she could barely get to him. She could barely see him. And so she couldn't tell him what she needed. So she made her way through the crowds and reached out to Jesus. But all she could really grab was his coat. And immediately, Jesus felt his power leave him. He looked around and asked, "Who touched me?" And she said, rather bravely, she said, "I did." And Jesus replied, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." Jesus not only took away her illness, but also her isolation and her shame. He freed her from her likely deep depression, and he gave her a fresh start. And he can do that for you and I too. We just have to ask for it. We are his beloved children. That is who and whose we are. That day, the woman decided to live as her true identity, daughter of the King. Jesus made her new because he knew what she needed and he gave it to her. But what about you? If I asked you who you are, what would you say? Maybe you'd say, "I'm an athlete," or "I'm a good daughter," "I'm a good boyfriend or girlfriend," "I'm a proud Cree man or woman." And all these things are good, but they're not the core of who you are. As for me, the truth is I was never lacking. I was filling with things other than God, worldly things. My lacking is where God seeks to fill me with grace. There's this ancient Japanese art called kintsugi, and kintsugi means golden repair, and it's the art of repairing broken pottery, broken ceramics, bowls, plates, cups, with this gold powder. And kintsugi is seen as a manifestation of resilience. So instead of throwing out things that are broken, the Japanese people repair these broken vessels with gold. And it enhances the look of the piece, making the break lines in each piece of pottery unique. And they're made new. And we too are kind of like those broken pieces of pottery. Yes, we're broken, we're flawed, but Christ can make us new. And when we give our lives to Christ, he tells us we are uniquely and wonderfully made. And when we try to fill our broken pieces with worldly things, it's like fixing broken pottery without glue. But God's grace is that gold that we can use to fill our lacking, our broken pieces. You are made for great things and a good story, no matter who you were in the past or what has happened to you. And I'm not sure what you're struggling with, but I do know there is more than one way to bleed. And you have to ask yourself, am I tired of bleeding? That power that was available to the woman is available to all of us. You have the opportunity to write your own story. And that takes bravery. It takes bravery not to conform to what society and the world is telling you to be. But I'll tell you, when you are rooted in Christ, it's secure, it's permanent, it's everlasting, and you just have to claim it.